The silk of my wedding dress felt like a shroud against my skin, cool and impossibly heavy. It was a deep ivory chosen after weeks of agonizing, a shade that was supposed to signify purity and new beginnings. Instead, it felt like a burial garment, whispering of obligations yet to be fulfilled. Outside the tall, arched window of the dressing room, the late afternoon sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the manicured lawns of the estate. The light, once golden and promising, now seemed weary, drained. Somewhere downstairs, a cacophony of hushed voices and the clinking of glasses was a constant reminder of the gathering guests. Amidst it all, I could hear the muffled sound of my soon-to-be mother-in-law's voice, a low, insistent drone that had been a constant hum in the background of my life for months. But today it felt different. Today it was a siren call I could no longer ignore, a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure that signaled an undeniable change. It was the sound of a storm brewing, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the fragile manufactured calm before it was officially over. My fiancé Mark had been a vision of effervescent excitement, his days filled with ambitious plans and a relentless optimism that had, until recently, been infectious. When we'd first started dating, he'd been so utterly charmed by my initial hesitations about meeting his parents, particularly his formidable mother. "They'll love you," he'd promised, his hand finding mine, his thumb stroking the back of it with reassuring familiarity. And for a while they seemed to. His father, a quiet, almost spectral man, offered a genial nod and a reserved smile whenever our paths crossed. His mother, Eleanor, however, was a force of nature. She was impeccably dressed, her every pronouncement delivered with an air of absolute, unshakable authority. She'd meticulously fussed over wedding venues, debated floral arrangements with a fervor that bordered on the fanatical, a passion usually reserved for the most intricate international diplomacy. All the while, she'd barely asked me a single question about myself. Not about my work, my family, my deeply held dreams. Nothing. It was as if I were a necessary accessory to Mark's future, a beautifully packaged addition to his already opulent life, rather than a person with a life and aspirations of my own. The first hint of friction, the almost imperceptible hairline crack that would eventually split everything wide open, manifested itself about 6 months before the wedding. We were having one of those necessary, if slightly awkward conversations about finances. Mark, bless his earnest heart, had tried to navigate the delicate territory with his usual diplomatic flair. "My mom's been asking about a prenup," he'd said, his gaze flicking nervously towards his phone screen as if seeking an escape route. "She thinks it's just standard practice, you know?" A prickle of unease, sharp and unwelcome, traced its way down my spine. Mark came from money, a comfortable inherited wealth that had cushioned his entire existence. I, on the other hand, had painstakingly built my life from the ground up, brick by hard-earned brick. My career was in a demanding field that required an unwavering commitment, long hours, and a deep well of dedication. I possessed modest savings, a small apartment I'd worked tirelessly to afford, and a carefully cultivated network of professional contacts that represented years of diligent effort. It wasn't a fortune, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was unequivocally mine. Every penny, every achievement had been earned. "A prenup," I'd repeated, my voice betraying a slight tightness that I hadn't intended. "Why would we need that?" Mark had offered a familiar shrug, a practiced, placating gesture that he'd clearly honed over years of managing family expectations. "Just to protect family assets, you know? She just wants to be sure everything's in order. She said it's just a formality." I'd pushed back, gently at first, seeking clarification rather than confrontation. "But Mark, I don't have any family assets to protect. What exactly would a prenup cover for me?" He'd waved a hand dismissively, as if the details were inconsequential. "Oh, you know, it's just the principle of it. She's a bit old-fashioned." That was my first real, undeniable clue that Eleanor's definition of old-fashioned was merely a polite euphemism for things must be done exactly as I dictate, and any deviation from my prescribed path is a personal affront, a challenge to my authority. I tried to let it go, to chalk it up to anxious parental possessiveness. We discussed it further, and I'd explained, calmly and rationally, that I felt a prenup implied a fundamental lack of trust, and that our marriage should be built on that essential trust, not on legal safeguards for assets I didn't possess. Mark, ever eager to smooth over any potential ripples, had agreed. He'd conveyed our decision to his mother, informing her that they wouldn't be proceeding with a prenup, and for a few blissful weeks, The topic had receded into the background, seemingly settled. Then the invitations went out, elegant cream-colored cards with embossed lettering. The venue was booked, a historic country house with sprawling gardens. The dress, this very dress, was ordered. The whirlwind of wedding planning consumed us, a feverish dance of decisions and details, and I, foolishly, allowed myself to believe that the prenup issue was truly settled, a minor hurdle overcome. I was wrong. The demand reappeared, this time with a far more insistent and forceful tenor, approximately 2 months before the wedding. Eleanor had called Mark's phone while I was in the room, the sound of her voice carrying through the thin walls. I'd caught snippets of their conversation. Unreasonable. Financial security. Your future. The words clipped and sharp. When Mark ended the call, his face was a mask of harried frustration. She's really set on this, he'd sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. She's even hired a lawyer. She wants me to go over the draft with him. This time there was no room for gentle explanation or patient negotiation. My patience, worn impossibly thin by months of being treated like a decorative piece of furniture, rather than an equal partner, snapped. Mark, I'd said, my voice low and steady, a dangerous calm settling over me. You told her no. I told her no. What is going on? He'd fidgeted, his gaze darting away from mine. She doesn't understand. She thinks you're trying to take advantage of the family's wealth. The accusation landed like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Take advantage? I'd echoed, my disbelief a palpable force in the room. Mark, I have my own career, my own life. I've never asked your family for anything. I've never even hinted at wanting their money. What do you think I've been doing all this time? I've been getting to know you. I've been building a life with you. Did you ever think to tell your mother what I actually own? He'd looked genuinely confused, his brow furrowed in a way that suggested he couldn't quite grasp my question. Own? What do you mean? She knows you have a job. That was the moment. The stark, almost painful realization of the sheer, oblivious disconnect between our worlds, between his understanding and mine. He hadn't understood that my ownership wasn't about spreadsheets and stock portfolios, about the tangible accumulation of wealth. It was about agency, about self-sufficiency, about the quiet, profound pride of building something from absolutely nothing. It was about the years of relentless study, the personal sacrifices, the late nights hunched over my desk, the hard-won recognition in my demanding field. It was about the intrinsic value of my own labor, which to Eleanor and, as it turned out, to Mark, seemed to be non-existent if it didn't involve a hefty inheritance. I'd walked away from that conversation, my heart pounding not with anger, but with a chilling, crystalline clarity. I wouldn't beg for respect. I wouldn't engage in a futile attempt to justify my existence or my inherent worth. But I also wouldn't stand by passively and let myself be dismissed, insulted, and threatened. I didn't confront Eleanor directly. That would have been a messy, unproductive exchange, exactly the kind of spectacle she would undoubtedly relish. Instead, I made a few quiet, strategic phone calls. I reached out to a couple of close friends, people who knew my work intimately, who understood my dedication, my struggles, and my hard-won triumphs. I shared the situation with them, not for sympathy, but for practical, unbiased information. I asked them very specifically about the value of my professional contributions, about the significant projects I'd successfully led, the innovations I'd spearheaded, the tangible impact I'd made in my industry. I asked them to quantify it, to put it in concrete, undeniable terms, in a way that couldn't be easily dismissed as abstract work. I needed them to help me articulate the undeniable return on investment my career represented. Then I went back to Mark, armed with a different kind of strategy. I've spoken to my lawyer, I'd said, my voice devoid of any discernible emotion, a carefully constructed shield against any lingering vulnerability. They've drafted a counterproposal to your mother's prenup. He'd looked instantly relieved, a visible unclenching of his shoulders. He seemed eager to present this as a swift, efficient resolution. Oh good. So you'll sign it then? No, Mark, I'd replied, handing him a neatly bound document, its pages crisp and professional. This isn't a prenup. This is a prenuptial valuation of assets and potential future earnings, meticulously based on my professional achievements and current market value. It details the intellectual property I've developed over the years, the client relationships I've painstakingly cultivated, and my projected earning capacity for the next 20 years. It also outlines my significant contributions to our potential shared life, the emotional labor, the domestic contributions, the unwavering support structure I provide. It's not about protecting family money, Mark. It's about recognizing and valuing the considerable assets I bring to this partnership. Your mother's lawyer can review it, and I'm more than happy to discuss the specifics with him, or with her if she's truly interested in understanding my position, rather than dismissing it. Mark had taken the document, his face a mask of bewildered apprehension. He clearly hadn't anticipated this. He'd expected tears, impassioned arguments, or perhaps a meek, inevitable capitulation. He hadn't expected business. He hadn't expected a woman who understood her own worth and was prepared to articulate it with unassailable logic. The days leading up to the wedding were imbued with a palpable tension. Eleanor and Mark engaged in hushed, frequent conversations, their voices laced with urgency. Eleanor's calls to Mark became more frequent, her tone growing increasingly agitated. I could hear her voice, sharp and strident, even through the closed door of his study. I didn't engage. I focused on the final meticulous details of the wedding, on the intricate lace of my dress, on the selection of the string quartet's repertoire. I was polite, outwardly distant, and entirely outwardly self-possessed. Inside, however, a quiet storm of resolve was gathering. The wedding day arrived, bathed in a bright, almost defiant clarity. Mark and I exchanged our vows, standing before a sea of familiar faces, a tapestry of friends and family united in their support. Eleanor was in the front pew, her expression unreadable, a tight, almost imperceptible line etched around her mouth. When it came time for the reception, the champagne flowing and the music swelling, she approached me, her eyes narrowed, her posture stiff and accusatory. "I've reviewed your document," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet somehow dripping with disdain. "It's audacious. I don't see why we're even discussing it. Mark is the one with the inheritance." I met her gaze, a small calm smile playing on my lips, a smile that held no trace of malice, only a quiet, unwavering confidence. "And I am the one with the skills, the drive, and the demonstrable potential to build my own significant success. This marriage is intended to be a partnership, Eleanor. And I believe in valuing all aspects of that partnership, not just the ones that come with a pre-existing fortune. My lawyer assures me the valuation is accurate and thoroughly substantiated." I paused, allowing the implications of my words to sink in, to resonate in the charged silence between us. "Perhaps your lawyer can explain to you the market rate for what I do, and the significant risks associated with overlooking such expertise and potential in any future joint ventures we might undertake." Her face, a carefully composed mask of entitlement, paled, then flushed a mottled red. The unspoken threat, the subtle suggestion that her precious family assets could be vulnerable to a woman she had so carelessly underestimated and dismissed, clearly landed. She sputtered something incoherent, a choked, indignant sound, then turned abruptly and marched away, leaving a ripple of confused whispers and exchanged glances in her wake. Mark avoided my eyes for the remainder of the evening, a guilty flush coloring his cheeks, a silent acknowledgement of his own misjudgment. But for the first time since the prenup demand had resurfaced, I felt a profound sense of quiet equilibrium, a deep-seated peace. The storm hadn't broken, not in the destructive way I'd feared. Instead, the foundations had irrevocably shifted. I hadn't stooped to their level. I hadn't engaged in petty squabbles or emotional blackmail. I had simply presented my own undeniable value, clearly, concisely, and unequivocally. And in the stunned silence that followed my words, I finally felt truly seen, not as an appendage, a decorative accessory, but as a force in my own right, a partner of equal standing. The wedding continued, the music swelled, and for the first time, the future felt like it was truly mine to build, with or without their ultimate endorsement. It was a future I had earned,